Hey guys, this is National Master Kevin Yang back at it with another video. So this series of games will be against none other than 23 Dragons. So let us begin. E4, D6, D4, G6. So here, 23 Dragons adopts the three pawn center, and some people like to add a fourth pawn. What I'm playing is just the good old modern. So G6, I'm playing here, getting my knight out, pawn out, queen out. I'm not trying to take the center right away. You've seen that sort of setup a lot, but this is actually very dangerous for black. It's a choice you go to when you're up for interesting positions, right? So you'll sort of see this that I don't necessarily get all the play at the very start. I build it up, wait for later, and strike when it's hot. So f4, bishop g7, knight f3, knight d7. I'm not doing much. I'm just getting my pieces out, and here's my time. I play d5. This is the first strike. So you're asking, wait, why didn't you play d5 the first time, right? Why didn't you play d5 here and make it happen? Well, it would be completely different. I know you might have thought, well, you lost a tempo by playing here and here. Well, that's true, but it's also important to time your pushes, right? Sometimes your pushes are a bit too sudden and you may not have enough support. So now by playing d5, I've acquired enough support from this knight. I've acquired enough support from my pawn. And just in case, I could go with a knight b6, just in case. So e takes, bishop d3, and all of a sudden now my pieces are oriented toward this e4 square, but our friend 23 Dragons gets the e5 square. So it's a very interesting balance. Knight bd2, castles c3, bishop to f5. Now, I can play knight g4. It is a completely valid move, but I want to develop all my other pieces first. So bishop f5, queen to c2, now I play knight to g4. Rook to e1, bishop takes, queen takes, knight to f5. So what I'm doing is I'm building on this bishop. Another thing I could have done is the move bishop to h6. I know it looks odd, but all I'm trying to do is I'm saying if I get a take, I can take here, right? So that's one thing I could do. Let's see. So another thing I could do, well, I could play queen to d6 and get my rook here and go for the same idea if I trade bishops, if I trade my knight for that bishop. So it's all about attacking that f4 pawn, in a sense. Bishop takes d3, queen takes, knight to f5, bishop to f2, and now I realize that my knights are a little bit misplaced. So what do? Well, it's a matter of sometimes that you have to change plans. And for me, changing plans was relocating my pieces so that we could control e4. And that's what I did. Knight d6, bishop h4 was a very good move, very good move. Here I played bishop f6 and I said, if you trade with me, my knight is going to take and we're going to get to e4. Bishop takes, knight e5, knight to e4. Nothing big, just trying to get control. Knight takes e4, knight takes e4. Now the thing with knight takes e4 is that it does allow f5, and that I might have underestimated as a threat. So that's why in the game I played knight takes e4, because I didn't really think f5 did too much. Like if I just played queen to g5, then, I would be okay. That's all I thought in my brain. I said, if this happens, I'm going to be okay. There's nothing that's going to happen. But in all honesty, queen to h3, knight to g4, knight to h6. This is some scary stuff, and I don't know if I'd want it to be on the board. So that's one thing. Queen to h3, and it would look kind of scary. So, in essence, that is why the computer says d takes e4 is the superior option. Queen to e2 would happen, and I could even play f6 here. So that's another benefit. And then if knight to g4, well, I could play f5, but there's knight to e5 again. But in this position, I have my pawns on a very solid, very solid structure. So that's one way to think about it. D takes, I played knight takes e4, rook takes e4 from 23 Dragons, and I was, at the same time I was surprised, I was also not surprised, because I've always taken our friend 23 Dragons to be one who's tried to explore the boundaries of sacrifices, tried to wonder, is this enough compensation? And I said, feel free to take my gift. So after f5, I said queen to g5. And in essence, I believe this sacrifice is completely has like plenty of compensation because first of all, my rooks aren't in the best places. They're passive. Meanwhile, this rook is assisting an attack. And I played the move queen to g5, saying, I'm protecting g6 more. But the problem is, there's this move h4. And here I'm in a little bit of trouble because after queen to d2, there's knight to g4 saying, if knight to f6 could be an option to prevent the rook from going here. And another option would be h5, right? Just trying to create more weaknesses, try to lunge toward the enemy king. So 23 Dragons was completely justified in sacrificing on e4. Knight g4 happened, but now there's rook f to e8, queen to f3, and now I say, you know what? I take, and if you do this, I'm going to trade queens, and I'm going to like it, and you're going to not. So queen takes, and I am so happy at this point. I get some pawns, king to g7, king to g6, f6. I'm just trying to gobble up pawns, but at the same time, I want to maintain my advantage. So I'm just taking pawns left and right. And here, after rook e7 and this pin, I win the game. So what really happened in this game that led to the downfall of 23 Dragons? Well, the opening was completely fine. It was all balanced. Now, I would say, for one thing, I would say, even though it doesn't make a difference, knight to g4 is a very real threat here. So if black knows, or if white knows that black might have the intention of playing knight to g4, I would suggest two moves. Number one, knight to e5, and number two, h3. Both of which prevent this knight from coming to g4. Because the bishop, well, you don't want to move the bishop, right? Because the bishop right now, you'll move the bishop later, but as for right now, it would be annoying for black to attack the bishop. So here, I was able to put some pressure, and then, maybe, in a sense, I got my knights to the good squares, but now they might be misplaced. They're not in the right area of the board, right? So I relocated them, knight to e4, and remember, knight takes e4, there's f5, so that's a note to self. And if pawn takes e4, I would have the opportunity to maybe play f6 in the future. So, and even after here, queen takes e4, c6, and now there was f5. So, in a sense, white justified the sacrifice. There might be f6, queen h4 opportunities. So I said queen g5, and this also runs into h4. So once again, it's just so many problems. So I would say the only move that really tipped the scale was this move, knight to g4. It tipped the scale because after rook to e8 takes f5, I sort of said, if you want to come here, I'm going to play f6. I'm going to activate my rook, and I'm going to feel better about myself. But if you trade queens, that's only going to give the person who is up material the better edge. So I'm going to get the better edge. I'm going to feel satisfied. Queen takes f5, and eventually with a little bit of difficulty, I was able to mop up our friend 23Dragons in somewhat of a complex game. So that was very complex, but as I say, well fought to 23Dragons. Now in our second game, it was a French looking defense, knight f6, d3. I was not looking for much, right? I said, g3, bishop to g2, knight to d4, and after knight to d4, I was starting to worry because at this point, I realized that d takes e4 wasn't the move here. Knight takes e4 was the move, and after knight takes e4, I'm playing queen takes e4. So that's the move. I just messed it up in my head. So instead, d takes e4. I played d takes e4 and now e5. This d4 square is going to become very critical to the black camp. So what I did, I played h3. I said, you may not come to g4 and try to threaten my knight or pin my knight to the queen. So I said, no, that's not possible. So knight to d4 happened, and I had to let that happen. But now I made another bad decision. I took on d4. And I have to repeat my own word because there is always room for you to criticize yourself. So here I'm criticizing myself because I made a bad trade. I made a bad trade because number one, this helps black in moving away the knight, getting the rook out, and putting pressure on this e-file. So in essence, this was a terrible trade for white, terrible trade for me, and I own up to my own mistakes. But queen takes d4 happened, and I was relieved. So bishop to e3, queen to d6, rook to d1, queen to b6. I took, castles. So now this looks very balanced. But now it's a matter of who outplays who, right? Bishop to e6, queen to f3. I'm just moving my queen away from this diagonal, right? Bishop to c4, rook to e1, rook a to d8, and now g4. Rook takes, h6. So this is completely equal. h4, I'm just trying to create chances here. I have no real chance of winning, but I would say a slim chance of maybe pulling through. So after bishop e6, bishop to h3, knight to h7, I'm making progress here, but in a sense I'm also severely weakening my own camp, right? You can see that I've had to make a few concessions to be able to sustain my push. So that takes a toll sometimes. And now our friend 23Dragons plays a very interesting move, the move g5, saying, you know what, you cannot advance any further. And my first instinct was that this was a positional mistake. But the more I looked at it, I felt like this was a very good move. Here's the reason why. The reason why is because positionally I thought that this knight was going to get shut out if I played the move h5. I thought it was going to get shut out. But in reality, it also does something more important than shutting out this knight. It prevents white from ever executing this. And in essence, it makes this bishop a very bad piece. This bishop has to relocate, and so does this knight. And so with that, the endgame dynamic, I leave you at this position. Hope to see you in the next video. I'll see you next time.